What did you know, or did you know anything about this story that the New York Times reported last month, that the Pentagon had essentially these quid pro quo deals with retired generals who, while presenting themselves on many of the networks as disinterested observers, in fact, were still perhaps involved in companies that had still had dealings with the Pentagon? It was a very dicey situation journalistically. Did you know about it? Did you know you had a staff of generals working for you in some respect?
That I didn't know. That was pretty much left for the Pentagon to run their way.
This next question I know is going to come across, and I can't resist it, it's going to come across to some degree as self-aggrandizing, but relative to the media, and I'm asking this for every person who ever came up to me on the street and said, I feel like I'm going out of my mind living through this. This cannot be the America that I grew up in. Were the critics in the media and outside the media of the president largely right?
In terms of the Iraq War and the build-up to the war?
Specifically that, and you can go out in any direction you want, but specifically in terms of Iraq.
I think certainly in terms of Iraq, there was a lot that they were right about as I went back and reflected on this. It's not that I'm necessarily aligned with them on some other views and things, but certainly on the build-up to the Iraqi war, we should have been listening some more to what they were saying. The American people should have been listening a little bit closer to some of what was being said. But I, like a lot of Americans, was caught up in the moment of post 9/11 and wanting to put my faith and trust in the White House and the president that I was serving.
Does it cost you, and I ask this question sympathetically, does it cost you sleep when you hear about another casualty in Iraq that you would have had that much to do with that war?
Well, I used to walk, and I talk about this in the book, I used to walk alongside the president when he would visit the fallen, and it has a very profound effect on you. Our troops are doing an amazing job. They've succeeded. I mean, they've done their job,
yes,
and they've done more than they've should have been called on to do in the first place, and they continue to do an amazing job. But I have been there in the room with the president when he's walked in to comfort families of the fallen, or walked into, I remember vividly, and I talk about this in the book as well, when the president walked into a room at Walter Reed, and you had a young mother with the boy, I think, was in the 7-year-old range, and his father is sitting there in a wheelchair with bandages wrapped all around his head, and none of us, you couldn't tell if he knew what was going on around him. And it was just a powerful moment, very moving moment. The president was moved by it, very much so. I could see in his eyes how moved he was by it, and I talk about that in the book. But you don't forget those moments.
But about Iraq, you had written in the book, in the permanent campaign era, it was all about manipulating sources of public opinion to the president's advantage. Was this true about Homeland Security, to your knowledge, to any degree? Because that's been a suspicion, obviously, of a lot of the president's critics. Did the White House manipulate at any point, to any degree, the threats of terror for the president's advantage?
I can't speak to that. That was more in some policymaker realm that, again, in part of the compartmentalized White House. That's not something I explore in the book because I don't have direct knowledge of some of that.
So there's a press conference. It pertains to the White House and a threat to the nation, and they did not clue you in on it.
Well, there were certainly times when I was involved in some of the threats. I remember it was over the holiday period, maybe 2004, when there were threats.
The Christmas time flights threats?
Yeah, the Christmas time flights. And I did sit in on some national security or counterterrorism meetings then, and there was a real concern then. But I can't speak to some of the other meetings that might have occurred.
One more break, then we look ahead with Scott McLellan. The 64,000-person question. The White House did all this for a war in Iraq. Are they now doing all this all over again for a war in Iran? And now we'll conclude Scott McLellan's first primetime interview by looking ahead. All that is in the book, as I've already described it, a kind of a Rosetta Stone for the Bush administration. About Iraq, you wrote, but today, as I look back on the campaign we waged to sell the Iraq war to the American people, a campaign I participated in, though I didn't play a major role in shaping it, I see more clearly the downside of applying modern campaign tactics to matters of grave historical import. Reflecting on that period has helped crystallize my understanding of the permanent campaign with its destructive excesses and how Washington, in its current state of partisan warfare, functions on mutual deception. The picture isn't pretty. Scott, are they doing that now about Iran?
I certainly hope that that is not the case, but we don't know. I don't know. I mean, I should say it that way. But they're still in this permanent campaign mode. They haven't backed away from that. I can't speak specifically to what the intent is in some of the people's heads there. I think that our options are certainly limited with all our commitments right now. But I hope that when people look and read this book, that they will learn some of the lessons from Iraq, and that we won't make some of the same mistakes that we made elsewhere.
So knowing what you know, if Dana Perino gets up there and starts making noises that sound very similar to what you heard from the administration, from Ari Fleischer in 2002, from other actual members of the administration and the cabinet, you would be suspicious?
I would be. I would be. I think that you would need to take those comments very seriously and be skeptical.
Something in here about the campaign ahead that actually touches on the campaign in past years. From page 68, no campaign was more single-mindedly centered on bringing down an opponent than that of George Herbert Walker Bush. The campaign was by most objective accounts full of distortions, misrepresentations, and zero-sum politics, accusing Michael Dukakis of everything from embracing furloughs for dangerous criminals to disliking the Pledge of Allegiance, the innuendo being that he was unpatriotic. The Pledge of Allegiance. That sounds a little familiar. Why 20 years later is that still being used against a candidate for the President of the United States?
I don't know. I think that is how our politics has gone since that was very much a turning point election. I think that George Bush 41, George Herbert Walker Bush, is a decent individual and a man that really believes in civility. But his advisors around him knew that the only way that they could win was to bring down his opponent and go fully negative and paint Michael Dukakis completely to the left, a guy that had painted himself or had a record of trying to work to the center in a lot of ways, and that legacy continues to this day. And Senator McCain says that he's going to speak out against that and not let that happen. I think that would be good for the country if that is the case. But there's certainly plenty of groups on the Republican side that are going to go forward with that kind of strategy.
A truce would be nice. I guess this is the final question. I'm going to go back to the idea of the loss of bipartisan opportunity. I have always thought that the moment at which Mr. Bush missed that opportunity, the last moment where he could have seized it and said, no, this is bigger than just Republican versus Democrat. The day the buzz started about how he was going to fill this position, this new position of Homeland Security Director, and he's thinking outside the box. And I sat there and I had this little flutter in my heart. I thought he's actually going to do what Roosevelt did in the Second World War, to some degree what Lincoln did during the Civil War. He's going to put a Democrat in the cabinet. Maybe not in charge, maybe it's a token, maybe it's a couple of them, maybe it's Al Gore. Would something like that have made that bipartisan dream a reality, and was that really the point of no return for him?
I think it would have helped certainly to have a cabinet that was more diverse in terms of party affiliation. There was only one, that was the Transportation Secretary, Norm Mineta, a good person. But I think it's a lesson for whoever's going to be the incoming president, that they really ought to reach out if they want to change the way things work in Washington and bring a number of people from maybe 3 or 4 key people into their administration, and a cabinet would be a good place to do that, to show that they're going to govern to the center and govern in a bipartisan way.
I have 30 seconds left, as it turns out. You decided who you're voting for or supporting in the presidential election this year?
I have not made a decision. I am thinking very carefully about that, but I've been so focused on the book that I want to take my time and hear what the candidates have to say. I'm intrigued by what Senator Obama has been running on about changing the way Washington works. I've had respect for Senator McCain as well for the way he's worked across the aisle with Democrats, but I'm going to take my time and think it through.
Scott McLellan, I don't want to get too fulsome on you. I don't think you're going to be dining out on the book for the rest of your life, but I think this is a primary document of American history. I'm very impressed with it, and I think at some point people will be teaching history classes based on it.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
And thanks for all your time.